Today, we have Dorothy Gemmell, a 5-time chief commercial officer of many different healthcare IT companies.
I learned early on, too, in those high growth companies, the people you were hiring kind of in that first 2 years, let's say, at least 50% of those people have to be able to lead other people. Not all leaders are really good at communicating or creating that environment of culture. And some honestly really care about it and some don't.
How do you know if somebody is the wrong person on the bus?
A toxic person who is negatively affecting your account management team, your product team, selling stuff that you can't deliver. It just has repercussions. CEOs don't know every part of the business.
That's right.
They know how to operate a company. They know what good looks like. You can't know every job. You can't know every role.
I met Dorothy Gemmell on the side of a Little League baseball field, watching our boys play together. At the time, I knew Dorothy was a senior executive in healthcare IT who had worked at some of the fastest growing companies in the industry. What I didn't appreciate, though, was just how much of a true leader she was. After retiring from 5 chief commercial officer roles, I asked Dorothy if she'd be willing to be my trial run for this podcast. Our conversation blew me away. Dorothy stepped into her first leadership role at just 25 years old, becoming her boss's boss. At Pharmacia, she saw firsthand the value of big company training and lateral exposure, including international sales. But she also recognized something else. Technology was about to fundamentally reshape healthcare. That insight led her to take a leap into a small emerging growth company called Medscape, where she helped scale the business from $20 million to more than $400 million in revenue. In our conversation, we talked deeply about building and leading teams, how to hire well, and how to stay focused when everything around you feels volatile. And as Dorothy moved to other organizations, she reflects on the type of CEO she's most loyal to, the differences between working in private versus public companies, and why, despite having all the credentials, she is happy being a number 2 rather than a CEO. And having lived through the early days of the internet, Dorothy also shares her perspective on how AI may shape the healthcare industry's next chapter. No Spotlight Needed is proud to welcome Dorothy Gemmell. So let's start with your background. You grew up in Long Island. You went to McGill in Canada, but you studied biochemistry. So what did you think you would be doing when you grew up?
So the age-old question, I think, like most kids growing up, I had many, many different things I wanted to be. But I think as I approached going to university, I thought I was going to go to medical school. And so hence the science piece of things. However, I ended up, yes, at McGill, loved it in Montreal. I think I was trying to get away from home. So why not go to another country for that experience? And loved my time there. But as I started in pre-med, I realized that I realized I didn't want to be a physician. Then after a couple summers spending time in the cancer research, I thought I was going to do my PhD. And then I was the head of my class government, and I was responsible for career day for our biochemistry class. And that is where I met leaders as we were trying to bring in companies for this career day from the pharmaceutical industry. And I really didn't know anything about it. But as I started to work with those folks and hear about the pharmaceutical industry, I said, wow, I could actually do business, sales, and other things and still consistently keep learning the science, which is what I loved. So I became a pharmaceutical sales rep. And started taking summer courses in business because I realized while I didn't want to give up my science, I realized I needed to learn some other things as well.
So your first stop after college was Pharmacia?
It was. I was a pharmaceutical sales rep calling on doctors on Long Island. Quite interesting. I was well trained in how to sell, which is something I always look for. We'll talk more about when I was working, but to this day, when I look at salespeople to hire who are going to generate revenue, I still, even in startup land, look for people that kind of worked in those bigger companies who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars training their people how to sell. So whether it's food companies like Kraft, whether it's good old ADP, whether it's the pharmaceutical industry like Merck, Pfizer, and others, the folks that spend even 2 years in a sales training program and even better in a leadership development program in those like Fortune 100 companies, they're so well trained that they can go off and work at startups and other things, but they just have the fundamentals. Just my opinion. But
And why do you think that the big companies are good experience, and why are they so good at training that maybe startups aren't?
So I think the basic thing that I've seen is when you're in a startup, which I've been in, even series B, C, D later on, you have no money for trainers. You may not even have a function called training.
Yeah.
And you're running so fast and moving so fast, there isn't even time to bring in an outside trainer.
Right.
I think, as companies get bigger, but mainly those Fortune, 500 companies, they have entire departments. They have expertise. They actually have folks that do trainings. I was a trainer for a little while when I was at pharmacy. It was a 6-month rotation, which was helpful because you learn how to coach and train other folks that work for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it really comes down to financing and then prioritization.
So you became a district manager at the age of 25, and you had to lead others that were much older, much more experienced than you. So what was that experience like? And were you just thrown into the leadership world pretty quickly on?
So that was interesting. I remember I became the manager at 25 of a district. I think it was a group of 8 to 10 people, excuse me, who were all over 40.
Wow.
And it was a very highly experienced sales district. And I also had to become the boss of the person that had been my boss.
Really?
Who had hired me. So it was a big thing, especially for me at 25 without having kind of a lot of life experience. But I made it work. I talked to a lot of people about it. My boss, who I was becoming his boss, also was very supportive and helpful. I guess it could have gone the other way.
That's right.
Very easily. And I think because I had been through a lot of training and in my 20s, I read lots of books about being a leader. I wanted that responsibility. I wanted to lead and manage people. So I even I know it's silly. What is it? Kenneth, I can't remember his last name, the 1-minute manager. Oh, Ken Blanchard. There was a series of books that probably are still around today. And probably if my daughter read them, she'd be like, oh my God, this is so basic. But honestly, it was I just followed the fundamentals of leadership. I spent a lot of time listening to people. I learned how to hold people accountable. That was pretty hard when you're 25 to hold people that had been your colleagues or who are much more experienced than you are. But it was a great experience, and we really came together as a team. And I think that's when I realized that I had the ability, whether it was a natural ability or I spent a lot of time learning to lead teams of people, no matter what they are and what they're made out of. And there are I've learned over the years, there's some fundamental basics to that. Now, leading different teams, and I think you and I talked about this off camera earlier, leading an engineering team versus a finance team versus a sales team are all very different, but there are some fundamentals to it. But yeah, I totally forgot about that. Thanks for bringing that up. God, it was a process.
You were there for 10 years. So clearly you kept learning, you kept advancing. And so I guess the question is, as you look back today, what do you think is the benefit of being at that big company for 10 years before you started another 25 in the startup world?
No, it is interesting. I kind of joked at one point, I thought I was going to be a serial monogamist because I did 10 years at pharmacy, which is now Pfizer, 10 years at WebMD. I'm like, is that my thing? It changed after that.
Yeah.
But, to your question, the benefit, I don't know whether people need to spend 10 years. I think at the time, I'm not even sure I knew what a startup was. So this is, the 90s. Back then, my friends, my colleagues, my, other people my age were all working at big companies. Maybe that was kind of the choice, or they were professionals, right? They were coming out of law school. They're coming out of medical school after, 10 years. So for me, I enjoyed the time there. The company invested a ton. I was part of a leadership development program. I had lots of different opportunities and experiences. I knew, because I loved the business angle of things, after spending time in sales and sales leadership, I knew I didn't just want to be that for the rest of my life. I think I did look up above me and had a lot of mentors that would move on to sales directors and presidents, whatever, always heads of sales. For some reason, I felt the need that I needed to learn other things. So I took a lateral move into marketing.
Okay.
Because I felt I needed to understand how products were marketed, not just sold.
Yeah.
And where did all the messaging and everything come from? I did also take a lateral move to have some international experience as well, because at the time I'd been so US focused. And I did love to travel, and it was fun. It was a blast.
Yeah.
I traveled a ton. I went all over the world. But even just learning how healthcare works in other countries, I did a little bit of a stint in Europe. And then, meaning I didn't live in Europe, but I was marketing, managing the marketing in Europe, and learned a little bit about Latin America as well. And I just found it fascinating how different countries operated. And doing business in different countries was different too.
So that early years of broadening out your skill set, your knowledge base, just really lays the foundation for the next chapter.
Yeah.
So it's the late 90s, and there is a bit of a, the internet is now the new thing, right? The .coms, and you've got tons of new businesses out there, and you decide to make the jump. Why? What was attractive about going to Medscape?
Yeah. So it was really interesting. Part of the reason was a couple things. Number one is at the time I was working in the HIV space. And for those that may remember HIV in the 90s, it was the time where combinations of drugs were actually starting to save people's lives. Like HIV and AIDS was not a death sentence, but the way in which the physicians at that time were using the drugs, they were doing trials and making treatment decisions on 8, 12, and 24-week data.
Wow.
We were getting pressured from the activist community to release the data. Now, you have to remember that back in that day, there was JAMA, there was all the same, they were in paper. They were paper journals. And the publication process was 6 to 12 months. And the fact that the activist community was like, listen, we are not waiting for you to release results that you have for clinical trials till they're published in JAMA in a paper. So there was this thing, as you mentioned, called the internet. Right. And there was no Wi-Fi, and it was like dial-up ISDN, then DSL. So there was pressure for us to publish abstracts of the data on the internet. And at that time, doctors treating HIV patients were some of the early users of the internet. So were oncologists and others, because they were just trying to save people's lives and make decisions. So I saw the future of how the internet at that time, and there was no like tech per se, but the internet could speed up healthcare, help people, help doctors, help patients. And at the time, Medscape was the leading place where doctors were going for this information. So I spent marketing dollars with Medscape to publish our data, to put advertisements for our drugs, things like that. And I think I caught the bug. I got to know them really well as a customer of theirs. And I think I just caught the bug. I think it was a combination of having spent 10 years in a large, not fast-moving company and seeing this company that was my vendor or my partner, how quickly they were growing. So I joined, I think I was employee number somewhere between 80 and 100 at Medscape. They also recruited me. They're like, listen, you love us. We think you can sell us. And I decided to take the jump. At the time, I was married at the time, and my husband at the time was working in advertising. And he was working for a big advertising agency. And we both kind of took the jump within a year. He went to a small agency and I went to Medscape. I went to an internet startup. So we did it. But, listen, we had both worked on our careers. We had worked for bigger companies. We had saved money. We had, advanced ourselves. And I'm so glad. I honestly, not that there's anything wrong with big companies, but I would never go back. I've found my sweet spot. Even when WebMD got to 2,000 people, it started to be too big.
Yeah.
I realized that I really loved being in a company where I knew people, knew everybody, had an opportunity to do more than just one thing, and really make decisions that have an impact, both good or bad. You have to be accountable for them. But
So as we watched the .com era go up, there was clearly the bust, right? And at the time, and I don't know if it was before or after they came public, so Medscape merged with Medical Logic. and that didn't turn out very well, and ultimately got acquired by WebMD. So you've watched the arc of what happened, and WebMD had their own set of issues also in the dot-com bust. So talk to me about that volatility, and how do you, as a leader, focus on the job at hand? There's, people are fearful of their jobs. You were able to survive. You could have lost your job. So how do you focus and your teams during that sort of difficult environment?
Yeah. So that was probably the first experience I had during that time that you just described where things didn't go well. And that was the first time where it was a situation where I had to help my team or teams or even my colleagues in a way through a time that wasn't good.
Yeah.
My time at Pharmacia and Pfizer was all about growth and goodness and building teams, and everything was going well. And I think in a bigger company, you're a little more insulated from that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, even in that 10 years, we never had there was no layoffs during that time. So I'd never experienced it.
Yeah.
So yes, Medscape was during the dot-com. We went public. We got lots of money. We spent lots of money
Right.
because everything was just, happy, happy, joy days.
Yeah.
And it also was, I wasn't as senior then, so I wasn't exposed to, our balance sheets and other things as much. But, looking back now, and I've seen the story repeated again, we'll talk about, later in my career. But this whole concept that you can run a company and not have to have profit or not have to have the basic fundamentals and that your investors are going to be fine with just spending. I really admire like the test, iterate, learn, grow. And you have to do those things to grow, but there's a balance between test, iterate, learn, stop the things that are not, and test, iterate, learn, and double down on the things that are working and make those decisions, as opposed to let's do 100 things,
Everything.
invest in everything, and run out of money. You asked about the team and helping teams through change and everything else. I think for myself and my entire team, none of us had ever been through any of this because I guess it was before this plethora of startups. So you didn't have a lot of people that had worked through this. I'm sure we had leaders who had worked for bigger companies that had layoffs and downsizings and everything else. But what was lucky for us is they acquired, I think, about 146 of the 180 employees. They took us, they took the people.
Yeah.
Because it was a great team of folks, and there were a lot of revenue generating folks. So you asked about being afraid for, losing my job and everything else. It is interesting, and I tell this to folks, if you're generating the revenue and you're hitting your goals, and you are responsible for that, the likelihood of you losing your job, unless you are toxic or negatively impacting or doing something wrong, you're probably not going to lose your job. It is
Interesting.
If you are the revenue of the company or leading the revenue company, but that's not always the case.
Yeah.
But in general, and especially for smaller companies and everything else, generally legal, finance, HR, which some of the companies I've worked for, we didn't even hire HR until, like the last, group to be hired, because you're spending your money where you're insourcing and spending your money on the functions that are the most important to growth, product, engineering. And it is easy to outsource or part-time CFOs, legal, HR, and other things. So I've seen that work in companies that have grown well. But that is what happened at Medscape.
Yeah.
But
so then Medscape survived. And
survived.
And continued to grow and thrive. You hired a lot during that period of time too. So as you talked about people who are accountable, people who are maybe good communicators, are there key things that you look to hire, key characteristics that you looked for in people when you were looking to not just hire, but build teams, right? Because teams require different characteristics by different people. How might you think about that?
Sure. So that time of, let's say, WebMD acquiring Medscape, like to the next 10 years, we actually had a period of great growth. So
Yeah.
we went from that 22 million to 400 or 500 million.
Right.
I think the team went from, I've said this a few times in my career. We had a meeting, the very first meeting of the sales commercial team at combined WebMD and Medscape. And I remember my boss at the time, it was Wayne Gattinella. He said, I want you all to look around the room. And I think there were maybe 20 of us in a room, the Avalon Hotel in New York City.
Nice.
Like, you will never, if we do this right, we will never be in a room this small again. And fast forward, whatever it was, about 10 years or so later, we would have our sales meetings in Florida, in California,
Right.
and we would have a ballroom, and there would be 200 people in that room. But your question was about, in hiring those people. So I would say, and it's, you've probably seen Angela Duckworth's TED Talk.
Yeah.
Grit is definitely this thing, particularly in companies where I think grit's always important in sales.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to be fearless, and you have to, obviously there's a process to selling, but you have to get used to people saying no or not answering or slamming the door in your proverbial face.
Right.
But on the other hand, even if it's not salespeople, it's account managers, it's sales compensation folks, it's your leaders and everything else. If you are in a fast growing company, AKA a startup or whatever, there is a profile of someone that needs to be able to move quickly, act decisively, and have that grit. I also think the ability to lead cross-functionally or lead teams is important. I learned early on too, in those high growth companies, the people you're hiring kind of in that first 2 years, let's say a 5-year run or something, at least 50% of those people have to be able to lead other people.
Yeah.
Not everybody.
Right.
You still need your individual contributors. Absolutely. And there's some people that are happier to being individual contributors. There's some people that like being an individual contributor, go on to lead people, go back to individual contributor. That's fine. But you do need to hire, even when you don't think about it. Some people need to be able to lead others.
Yeah.
And so you need to look for examples in their career, in whether it's sport, even sports in college or sports in high school, in their other jobs, in their, outside curricular activities, where they are leading teams and also leading cross-functionally to get things done, and asking people to give you examples of that, I think is really, really important. So I would say those are the important pieces. And then, when I'm hiring salespeople, if they can't tell me that their goal was X and then they achieved Y, even going back 5 years, then they're not the person. Like I just told you, God, no, how long was it? 20 years ago? Like I remember we were $22 million the first year of it.
So
I can probably tell you that a couple years later when we hit 101 million, like I remember those numbers. And really good sales and commercial people, because you asked about accountability too, they have to be focused on the numbers.
Yeah.
If they don't know their numbers and where they are against their numbers, probably not the right person.
That's so interesting.
That's salespeople. Like account managers, other people don't have to necessarily do that. But yeah.
That's so interesting. So it's people who are accountable, resilient, but also demonstrate development, that they can continue to grow with the company and grow to be leaders. Yeah.
I usually look at it 50-50. If I'm hiring a team of 10 people, I need half of them to be able to see that they can take on more.
Yeah.
The other half, it could be, maybe it's a bet. I'm not sure if they can or can't, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But because it is hard if you don't do that. If you're not hiring for the future, you're kind of going to hit a wall where you're going to have to bring in a lot of people from the outside, that's always good too, a little bit. But if it has to be a lot of people, it's hard.
Yeah. All right. So you mentioned, what did you say, when it got to 2,000 people, you were starting to say, all right, this is a little too much for me. So what made you decide to leave? What were the signals that said, all right, I'm ready for a new challenge?
When I left WebMD, after that, my second 10-year stint.
Right.
So
your second monogamous relationship.
So Combination of it was time and kind of it was mutual too. I think it was a combination of that I'd done my 10 years.
Yeah.
It was time. And also just philosophically, WebMD decided to separate consumer and healthcare professional. And I had always done both. And from my vision and the way we went to market was this unique opportunity that we had both in the market. A lot of others did not. Our competitors didn't. But it was a corporate decision, fine. And then it was like, hey, Dorothy, do you want to do one or the other?
Right.
And in my heart, it just wasn't. I didn't want to do one or the other.
Yeah.
It's like saying, choose between your children. No. So it was time. It was time for me. And it was good. So I was excited by the next thing. And so the next thing, although I will be honest, I had a non-compete.
Well, right.
And so this is something that comes up often when I'm mentoring people and other things, people that are leaving jobs. Always leave things in a good place, which I did. I'm still good friends and whatever. So I went to Havas because it was non-competitive and an opportunity for me to learn kind of a different side.
The agency
side. But I think that was the first time I realized that if you are a really good leader of people and if your team knows what they're doing, right? They knew the advertising business and everything else. You can lead those folks as long as you can enable them to do their best work. It's the same thing. And I know you're going to be interviewing all these amazing CEOs. The CEOs don't know every part of the business.
That's right.
They know how to operate a company. They know what good looks like. They've also seen what doesn't work too. But there is a point, particularly in bigger organizations, like you're going to be focusing on some big public companies, that you can't know every job. You can't know every role. So that was the first time that I realized that I could come in and lead something that I wasn't an expert at. And I hadn't grown it, right? At WebMD and other places, like I'd started at the bottom and grown it and built it and everything else. So it was a good lesson for me. And I learned a ton. It was a great team. I did have to turn some people over quickly. I also promoted some people. And I think we'll talk about this. It's something I've learned in all of the roles that I've taken, and particularly as I've taken over senior teams, is at Havas, I had a 100-day plan. And we talked about it. I stuck to it. Even when I left, someone made me like this poster of my 100-day plan and realized that you do need to make the changes you're going to make. Now, those changes could be moving people out. It could be moving people up. It could be moving people in from the outside. All those things are change, but they need to be done thoughtfully, swiftly, and I don't think you can do it in 3 weeks, but I think in 90 days, you should, as a leader, be able to assess the business and understand what you need to do.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about getting the right people on the bus, the right people off the bus, and the right people in the right seats. How do you know if somebody is the wrong person on the bus? Is it a toxicity issue? Is it a unwillingness to adapt? What are how do you know?
So the answer is it can be many things. You just mentioned a couple. It's unfortunately, it's never just one thing. But how do you know? I think it's a balance of, number one is I'm a big fan of when you first start with something, you really get to know your people in a group, one-on-one. I know people make fun of like team building and, retreats and things like that. I think it is a mixture of my process is generally I spend a good amount of time with each person on my leadership team, both in a, hey, come to me and give me a business overview. Another second interaction is like, let's have dinner, let's have lunch, let's spend some time getting to know each other. And 3 is getting to see them with their team. Like whether it's listening in on a Zoom or coming to their staff meeting or whatever, or they're having a sales meeting or an offsite or a product meeting, see them with their team. And then the last piece is see them within your team, which I kind of do last because you need to get to know people. So those are usually the assessments I make of each person on the leadership team. But what is it that off the bus? It can be a lot of things. It can be inability to change, hopefully, especially when you're getting into a senior level, there isn't toxicity, but toxicity has to go. Toxicity, maybe we'll talk about this later. It's the same thing. It's painful. Mm-hmm. But I remember the very first time I had to let go one of our top sales performers. She was by far doing 2x the amount of revenue of my next best performer. And I remember going to my CEO and saying, I have to. And they were even like, "Are you kidding? How are we going to make up the revenue? How?" But I've learned this over the years. A toxic person who is negatively affecting your account management team, your product team, selling stuff that you can't deliver. I mean, it just has repercussions across everyone. And if they're not, they don't have to be a cross-functional leader, but if they're not a good team player, in every case I've had to do it, I've probably done it 5 times in my career. When you take out the toxic person, it does need to be done quickly. It's always the right thing.
Yeah.
Whether it's 2 days later or it's a month later, you'll have people kind of come back to you and say, I can't believe you did that, but it's so much better. And we have made up the revenue and we have made up whatever it is, the deliverables, in no time flat. It just was like a blip.
Yeah.
But it's hard.
Yeah.
And it's hard for the organization. And it's shocking usually because they can be toxic and be a top performer, a person a linchpin, right? That everybody thinks is a linchpin. But sometimes you have to. But sometimes it just is someone may have hit their plateau. Mm-hmm. You need them to do the next thing and you realize they just can't. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
In those cases, you really do have to try coaching and helping and trying to find other ways. But sometimes that happens as well. Yeah.
But I do love the fact that you don't go in as like a bull in a china shop. You sit back, you assess in those 90 days as to what the organization really needs.
Yeah. So every time I've learned, and I've learned this from doing it, I've learned it from mentors, but I've also learned it from reading books and things like that old 100-day plan, 90-day plan. I really think it's important, but I think it's important to tell everybody you're doing it. I tell everybody when I first start, like I tell them what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I kind of tell them my process. It doesn't need to be a secret. I tell them I'm going to take 90 days to learn the business, to learn about all of you, to learn about your teams, to learn about each of you. And I go, and then if I'm going to make changes, I may or may not, I will do it at the end of those 90 days.
Yeah.
And if you tell everybody, they know what to expect. I think it's harder when someone just comes in, you don't know what they're doing.
Right.
You know I think that causes more turmoil.
So your next several stops were in a variety of different sectors, behavioral health, electronic medical records, and then pharmacy. You've also had the opportunity to work for many different CEOs. Is there a certain CEO type? What are the characteristics of CEOs that make you loyal to them? You try to get loyalty from your team. What makes you loyal to some exceptional CEOs?
Sure. As I was preparing, I think I've worked for 12 different CEOs, 2 interims, some of which were founders, some of which were not founders, some were highly experienced, some were put into the roles, like they'd been a CFO, they got put into the role, like a lot of different combinations. But I would say, in my mind, and maybe it's the construct of my being like a chief commercial officer, is the CEOs that I've felt most loyal to, that I would talk about today, that I think are just amazing. We worked really well together. They were the vision person. Mm-hmm. They were the fundraiser. They were the person that I'm not necessarily. And they were very good leaders and communicators, like by far. But I always joke because I do get called about CEO roles, and I just have said no. Like I'm a really good number 2. I'm an executor. And I think the CEOs that I've worked with that either rehire me or bring me back for things, or I worked with for a really long time, the feedback that they gave me, and yes, again, they're good communicators and they give me and others really great direct feedback. Sometimes good, sometimes not good, but it's helpful. Both of those things are important. Is we've worked really well together because they have the plan, the vision, they agree on the strategy, I go execute it. I can give feedback on it, that's fine. But especially in a company that's larger, or you have a board decision that's signed off on the strategy, the investment, et cetera, I'll go execute it and build the teams to make sure it gets done and do it and have fun too.
Yeah.
Because honestly, and I see this more as I get older, like it's about enjoying. We have a choice as to what we want to do, where we want to work, what we want to do. Maybe in your 20s, you don't have as much of a choice.
Right.
But as you get older, like it's got to be fun.
Yeah.
So I think for me, those CEOs created an environment that allowed me to have fun, allowed my teams to excel. People felt rewarded, recognized, and people also felt like we were on a mission to do something.
Yeah.
And I think that's particularly important in healthcare. I'm sure it's important in everything. But I think the CEOs that I've been most impressed with and most, to use your word, most loyal to and will run through a wall for are the ones that do those things, create a culture of recognition, mission, and also, I'll leave it at this, don't operate a goat rodeo. Like they have strategic discipline, and it's an organization that has strategic discipline. People focus on what they're supposed to focus on and what the goals are, because the companies that I've seen that failed, it is a little bit like a goat rodeo. We're doing everything and too much.
Right.
And having that person as CEO to say, these are the 5 things we're doing and we're going to do them really well, not 20, and saying no to things is super important.
Setting the tone at the top and setting the direction.
Yeah.
That's great. Dorothy, you talked about being a great number 2. And I think some people would say, well, why shouldn't you be number 1? Right? So talk to me about why what are the different skill sets in your mind between a CEO versus a president or chief commercial officer, and why you're happy being a number 2?
Sure. Now, a really, really good question. And obviously it's a kind of a personal choice and something I've grown into. I think it's a combination of having worked for, 10, 11, 12 different CEOs over my career. And I've learned something from each of them. And I've also seen the ones that are amazing and great and the ones that maybe shouldn't be CEOs. I've had both. Luckily, they've all been great bosses. But to me, a CEO really has to be able to set culture, set vision, and outline a vision very clearly. Also, since a lot of the companies I worked with were VC and PE backed, it's fundraising and dealing with boards, as well as raising money. I would say that for me as well, I've learned over my career, I'm a really good executor. I'm probably not as much of a visionary. I can take any strategy and contribute to a strategy, speak up about it, but then I can go execute it. And I learned that over the years, and I can motivate teams to do that. I guess I also enjoy being that number 2 position. And I would say the last part of my decision is probably more personal. Being a CEO, particularly of a small growth company, is truly all consuming.
Yeah.
And for most of my working life, I've been a mom. Some of it I've been a wife. I've been, a daughter to my parents. And honestly, I think it's a personal choice that I wanted to have a life. I knew if I became a CEO, I would have to throw in 7 days a week.
Right.
Travel 24 hours a day, always be on, and really guide the company. So I think it's a combination of knowing my strengths and weaknesses and also just a personal choice.
Well, so just on that personal choice and that sacrifice, as you reflect back now that you are retired, what personal sacrifices do you feel like you've had to make? I mean, yes, maybe not a CEO role, which it sounds like you could have had, but even at the C-suite level, I'm sure there were sacrifices that needed to be made along the way.
Sure. I would say that the good news is the sacrifices were minimal, in my opinion, and the rewards of leading teams, building companies, hitting big goals, working for great brands, and obviously kind of personal success, whether that's from a promotion perspective, from a financial perspective, giving me freedom now to retire kind of at a younger age than most people do. It's great. But I would say the sacrifices probably were a little on the personal side. I've done a lot of speaking over the years about kind of the work-life balance piece, especially about being a mom. But the one thing I've always told people, and I tried to stay true to, is I did not waste time feeling guilty. So if I traveled, which I did for an early part of my career when my daughter was young. I would leave on Tuesday mornings or Monday nights and get home on Thursdays, and I would be away.
Yeah.
But what I made sure of was on the weekends, I spent all my time with her. And it was interesting because at the time I was living in a part of the country, most of my friends were stay-at-home moms, and I was kind of the only one that worked. So what was interesting is I saw that the choices of, my friends who stayed at home on the weekends, they weren't home at all. They were out, doing things for themselves because all week they were home taking care of kids. So for me, I just did the opposite. I was away at work all week, and on the weekends, I dedicated my time to my kids. So I can proudly say, because my son's 15 and my daughter's now an adult and 22, we've had those conversations about, hey, would you have preferred that I didn't travel, didn't work as much, et cetera? And both my kids honestly have told me, they're like, oh my God, we couldn't imagine you staying home and doing those things. So I feel good. They're proud of me. Doesn't sound like, they're normal humans and doing well in their lives as well. So for me, I knew even after having a 6-week, 8-week-old, because the joke was at the time I had my first daughter when I was 35, was I was going to retire and step back after having my first baby. And after about 6 or 8 weeks of being home,
get me back
I called
to work.
my boss, who was a CEO. I was like, I'm coming back. I can't do this.
No, it's too hard.
So no regrets at all. I'm very
That's
happy
great.
with my choices.
I love that. I love that there's no guilt. There's no guilt. And I think that's what a lot of working moms have to deal with, but it's great.
I do agree. And I, again, as I said over the years when I've been asked the question, if women took the amount of time they spent feeling guilty and took those hours and just spent it with their kids doing something, I think that would be a big win.
Feel good. Yeah. The other thing you mentioned was working for private or VC-backed companies versus publicly traded, which obviously Medscape, WebMD, and then GoodRx, the last stop in your at least recent career. What's the difference in your mind between those 2 or 3? I don't know if there's a difference between private versus VC-backed, but those different types of companies in terms of expectations, in terms of how you sell, how you the cultures, et cetera.
So really good question. And I'm going to give credit to a friend of mine who works at a private equity firm. I had come off of my 4th or 5th VC-backed company, building, growing at 30, 40% growth, small companies having to do a lot of things. And it was the middle of COVID. And I started looking for my next gig, talking to the amazing CEOs. And I kind of said, it's not you, it's me. I just felt like I couldn't do it again.
Right.
And I talked to a friend of mine who very experienced, works in a private equity firm. And he said, Dorothy, here's my opinion. He goes, VC versus PE versus public companies. VCs are like sprinting. Private equity is like marathons. And public companies is like treadmills. If you looked at it from an exercise perspective. Number one is none of them are better exercise than the other.
Right.
But if you do one too long, it actually isn't really good for you. So one is not better or worse. It's just exercising different muscles and a different approach. So treadmill, public company, you got to hit those quarterly numbers every quarter.
Sure.
There's no doubt about it. Private equity, you're going for the longer term, and VC is like sprinting. You're just constantly sprinting. So that's my analogy. I love all 3 of them, but they're all different. Now, you asked the question of, do you need to execute and operate differently? You do. I mean, there's no doubt in a VC fast growth, if you're trying to grow 30, 40%, you have to make decisions quickly. You have to be nimble. You have to try things. And then if they're not working, stop quickly, et cetera. But generally it's a smaller company. So there's less bureaucracy and you're on the hook. So you can do that. When you're in a public company, I'll go to the other extreme. You have a bigger board, you have a bigger leadership team. Generally, they're more humans working in the company. Culture always matters, but from an execution perspective and growth perspective, I guess things take longer. However, you tend to already have product market fit. Hopefully you're a leading brand. When you're developing and testing things, you have more resources to do it.
Yeah.
You have a legal department, you have an HR department, you have training and development in a public company. when you're a VC back startup, I mean,
you are the department.
You are the department and you're outsourcing everything. So it's just, I've learned from all of them. I can't say one is my favorite versus the other, but you just adapt.
Yeah. After Havas in 2015, you actually went on to work at 3 or 4 different smaller emerging growth companies, for 2 to 3 years at a stints, if you will. Was that by design that you wanted to work for multiple different companies? It was multiple different parts of healthcare. Was that something that you wanted to do to broaden out your knowledge base rather than stay at one company and go really, really deep?
Sure. Good question. I don't know if it was all planned.
Right.
However, after spending a decade, right, at what was Pharmacy and now Pfizer, and then a decade at WebMD, like I had done my long stints and seen kind of growth and different things. Havas, loved my time there, but I also realized that I wanted to go back to a tech company that had a product versus a company that was, billable hours, agency of services, right?
Yeah.
Ad agency of services. I wanted to go back to a company where we're selling something. That part was planned. And what was planned was I did want to broaden my experience. I'd spent a lot of time with pharma as a customer. I'd spent a lot of time in and around media and healthcare information. And at that time, I really wanted to get into kind of more the product side of it. So next was Practice Fusion because I was really interested in turning their data into a product.
Right.
Now
So
still selling to pharma,
records.
same customer. And that was really my first tech company, understanding what product management did and what engineers built. And, we had software. Then next was a chance. And again, was it planned, to be 2 or 3 years apiece? I don't know about that. But I think in those faster growth companies and also as they go towards exit, I knew I didn't want to work for the big, huge company was acquiring them. So I generally exited before I'd have to stay, go back to a big Fortune 50 company. But the next one also was to change my customer base. So when I went to it was payer and employer as customers, which I've never done before. It was behavioral health. So it was telehealth.
Right.
And this is before COVID. So it was really both broadening and also learning new customer base and seeing if I could do it.
Yeah.
Could I build a team? Could I build a business? Could we sell to a new customer base? And then Capsule was selling to providers. So that was new too.
Pharmacy.
Providers of all size. It was pharmacy. And the reason for Capsule was going to be acquired again was acquired by a big company. And Capsule was back kind of in that building growing phase. So,
the other thing you talked about was scaling a business, and cultures can change as companies scale. Now, maybe in some of those early stage companies, you were out before it could really change. But how do companies preserve culture as they get bigger? I mean, you saw it at WebMD. How hard is that, and what do you need to focus on?
So it's interesting. So I think I do think it's hard. Because companies do change when they hit different phases, et cetera. But this is where I give a lot of credit to CEOs because culture really does kind of come from the top. It's a combination of leading by example. It's a combination of setting values and making sure that everything aligns around them. So, I have seen it work both ways. I have seen companies like GoodRx maintain their culture. Between advising and then working for GoodRx, it was 5 years. There was a lot of growth. They maintained their culture very well, but it was work. And as you grow a company, each department and this whole, I know it sounds silly, the mission, vision, values thing,
No,
but like for the companies, it's like write them and stick them on a wall and never discuss them again. It's not going to work. It's what is a lot of work is everything from performance reviews to the way you set your goals to constantly, celebrating, recognizing, and readjusting around them is really, really important. And that is not easy. It does get harder as you have more humans and more departments in a company. And then also as your leadership team grows, because not all leaders are really good at communicating or creating that environment of culture. And some honestly really care about it and some don't. So it is tough sometimes if you have a leadership team and half the team is really into it and half the team could care less.
Yeah.
But that's where the CEO and the leadership comes in, kind of expecting it.
Yeah. You mentioned GoodRx, where you had the role of chief commercial officer, but also president at the same time. And I'm curious, as you continue to evolve in your career, how did your role have to change, especially once you enter the C-suite? How is that role in the C-suite different than a middle management leader, for example?
Sure. I think it's a combination of obviously having a seat at the table in setting strategy and having a voice, which is important. I think it usually comes along with just having more responsibility. I spent my early career kind of just running sales. Great, just hit a sales goal. That's
Right.
easy. But then as you take on more responsibility and start running departments and everything else, you've got the operational side of it. You've got everything from, you have the P&L.
Yeah.
I guess that's the big difference. Instead of
you have
just
a budget.
generating the sales, you actually have to generate the sales and achieve the margins
That's
or
right.
the EBITDA, whatever your target is. So I think those are the biggest changes between being kind of responsible for one thing in middle management to being having a seat at the table in the C-suite as well.
That's so interesting. And as you think about the relationship among the C-suite, what makes for a good team at that level in your mind?
What makes for a good team in the C-suite, and luckily most of the teams I've been part of have been very functional, which is great. And I think that's what's contributed to most of the companies doing really well. I've been lucky for those companies I work with, because it isn't just about generating the revenue, as you know.
Yeah.
It's the product. It's, great legal. It's great HR with the culture. It's not just like, hey, generate the revenue.
Yeah.
So I would say trusting, agreeing to disagree. Most of the recent, let's say, last 5 companies I worked for, part of our kind of mantra as a senior leadership team is that we would call each other out and we would be direct.
I like that.
And everybody's ideas were, okay. And again, it kind of comes from the top. Again, it's that CEO who's going to make sure it's not just one voice on the team that's heard. It's the CEO that's going to call out somebody or draw someone who's just really quiet all the time. And I think a CEO with great, interpersonal skills can also tell, they can read the body language and other things. Now, as much as it's a little bit hokey, I will say kind of a couple times a year, team building exercises, offsites, going, as a leadership team, especially if someone new joins the team or someone leaves, right? I think that has been incredibly important. So the companies getting to know each other a little bit on a personal level, getting out of the office or dedicating a full day and a half, because that's, as much as it only sounds like a day and a half, it's so hard. Yeah. In these fast growing businesses. But those things do matter and make the team more productive
and tighter.
For sure.
So Dorothy, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you some industry questions while we're here. You have a unique perspective because you watched the internet change healthcare. And we now have the promise of AI that could fundamentally reshape the industry as well. What are you seeing? And is that accelerating in any way, shape, or form?
Sure. I am an AI optimist. People don't have to agree with me, but I am an AI optimist. I also think too, AI has already had a tremendous impact on healthcare. If you look at how our mammograms, x-rays, and other things are read and imaging, for me, the ability to know that a human looked at it, but also it was compared against, 5 million other mammograms that were taken that were either positive or negative for breast cancer. Like, I think that's a good thing. So some things have already started to happen. I do think there will be more. I think it is perfect timing, particularly in the US. We have a physician crisis. We have a shortage.
Yes.
Certain specialties. Now, certain specialties like surgery and delivering babies, okay, well, we need humans to do that. But the ability to have AI support, physician's assistants or AI just to support the diagnosis and triage in a way that can create capacity for a physician will be huge for this country.
Yes.
So those are a couple areas where I think it would be important. I am less concerned about AI somehow taking over medicine and everything else. I feel like there are a lot of, protections in place. And actually, if AI can help bring together all our disparate medical data that sits in a gazillion different places in this country, that might actually be helpful for outcomes and our healthcare.
Yeah. Well, my ER physician husband is grateful maybe that he won't be replaced, or maybe it'll force him to retire and then he will be grateful. Who knows? Dorothy, as you look back on your career, what are you most proud of?
I would say I am most proud of the people that I hired, interacted with, grew over the years and worked with, and seeing what they're doing now. That's probably the most rewarding thing, is to see someone, I hired 20 something years ago who's now a CEO or a chief commercial officer or started a company or, just doing amazing things. That's the thing I'm most proud of.
Well, I will tell you that the people that I talked to said that you were an incredible culture carrier, a teammate. You had an innate ability to bring people in and to build consensus and really drive, momentum and scale and revenue growth and to see people successful. So a mission accomplished, Dorothy.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank
Sheetal.
you, Dorothy. This has been excellent. You've imparted so much wisdom, both on the healthcare side, building teams, building culture, and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
You've got it, Sheetal. Thanks a lot.
All right.